Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here today and talk to you about Apple Search Ads. I'm going to go to my presentation and give you an overview of where they fit in the broader ecosystem. I'll give you some tips on how you can kind of optimize your ads, give you some numbers based on the survey that we did. And I'll finish the presentation with talking a little bit about attribution and how attribution and Apple Search Ads fit in the broader ecosystem. Okay, so before we go into all of that, let me tell you a little bit about me. So I'm Mada. I'm one of the founders of a company called Branch. These are the big events in my life, basically being born, being an engineer, and then becoming an app developer, and then ending up founding Branch. Branch is mobile linking and mobile growth platform for the world's best apps. So we have about 30,000 apps using us. And we basically build links that take people to content regardless if that content is in an app or on a website. And we provide better experiences and better measurements. So recently we actually launched a product that actually helps marketers understand better their acquisition efforts. So this is kind of where my expertise and experience with Apple Search Ads comes in. So let's start talking a little bit about Apple Search Ads and what they are. So they're a product enabling app publishers paid access to the top spot in the App Store search results. And this is something, you know, when I was building my first app called Kindred, I really wish that I had. I remember there was we were getting all our traffic came either from the app stores. We were featured in Best New Apps, or from all the money that we raised from VCs that we spent it all on Facebook ads. So once the features ended, we always wanted a way to keep getting traffic, and there was no way to do that. So when Apple introduced Apple Search Ads, I got incredibly excited because there was a way that you can get discovered in the App Store without just being featured. So in a way, if you have money to spend on Apple Search Ads, getting that traffic is now available to you. And if the best way I think to think about Apple Search Ads and the way I think about it is really, I mean, it's the iOS version of the Google Play AdWords ad, but it really is just the way AdWords works for the web. Apple Search Ads works for the App Store. And why does it matter? Well, it matters because 65% of all downloads follow an App Store search. So for each of you, take a minute and think about how did you install, you know, the last app that you installed. And in probably most of the cases, someone might have told you about an ad and you went and you searched for it. So it's true, many of those App Store searches are actually branded. I think actually 9 in 10 of App Store searches are branded. But the App Store search can help you actually tap into that, whether someone is looking for your brand, making sure that you appear, but also when someone is looking for a competitor brand, making sure that you appear as an option and can take away some of that traffic that was intended for them. Something to keep in mind is that there's two types of Apple Search Ads. So in December of last year, so not too long ago, Apple actually introduced a basic version. It's US only. And if you don't know that, the differences between advanced and basic are really based on the audience. So the advanced Apple Search Ads are now available internationally, and they keep opening to new countries. These are just the stores that they are available in. But for you to access some of the stores, there's a list on their website, and there's about 40 different regions that you can reside in and run Apple Search Ads in any of these storefronts. So the advanced version is really made for marketers who know what they're doing. So it allows you to customize, target, do budget setup, customize your bidding, and it's pay per tap. So when someone clicks on an ad, that's when you pay. And it's really interesting. This is the advanced version is very similar to, for all of you that have used AdWords, it's a very similar version to that. We get a lot of customization, and it's obviously more difficult to use, but you get a lot of ownership over your campaigns. So the basic version is probably, when I was an app developer and I didn't know that much about marketing, it's probably what we would have used in those times. It's US only, and it's really made for small developers that not necessarily they don't know what they're doing, but maybe they don't have as much time to edit and manage their campaigns. And it requires little setup or customizations, but the really cool thing about the basic version is that you can actually pay per install. So you don't pay, if people click on ads and they just end up installing their app, you don't end up paying. So you have a lot less ownership over it, but you only pay for a result. So you're basically, in a way, trusting Apple to give you the best installs for your particular app. So when we think about Apple search ads, I think one question that I hear over and over again is, where do they sit in comparison to other channels, and how are they getting used? How are they getting used compared to like all the other paid channels and even other organic channels in acquisition? And this results here, and what you see here, is based on a survey that we did with mobile app developers, marketers, and product managers, from apps ranging for very tiny ones to ones with more than 1 million MAUs. And we had about 200 people answering our survey. And this was kind of the results that we saw. And this is similar to the data that we see aggregated in our branch dashboard when we look at people using ads. So obviously, people are using Facebook app installs as their biggest source for generating new installs. And after that is the Google Universal Ad campaigns. And the third is actually not Apple search ads, but actually users sending people to the app from other properties like their website, email, social. And then Apple search ads is the third largest when it comes to networks. So when you look in our universal attribution data, the product team didn't allow me to share that today, but I asked them to pull the data, and it's very similar. Facebook app installs is the number one, Google Universal Ads number two, and Apple Search Ads is coming right after. And I think what's really interesting, and I tried to drill down in the data with this, I tried to actually look by type and who are the type of who is using Apple Search Ads more than others. And I kind of try to break it down here, and you see that it actually really varies. So social networking and gaming are much bigger than others like business, utilities, and travel in terms of usage of Apple Search Ads. And it does make sense. If you're like a travel app that has a big brand and you're already number one, you might not be as inclined using this as if you are a new game and you're trying to get traffic from a similar game that someone might be looking for. You build like your own game, you're trying to get traffic from that, and you might be using this more. I also tried to break it down in our survey by the type of budget used. And this was also very interesting to me, but it made a lot of sense that the really tiny apps that don't have a lot of budget, so with very small budget, are not using this very much. And the apps with over 5 million in marketing budget are using Apple Search Ads as a bigger percentage of their budget. And this was even so when I broke it out by budget and I broke paid versus organic, the more budget a brand had, the less effort they spent with their organic offers, and the tinier, the smaller apps obviously spend a lot more time with things like referral, organic, social, and then that obviously made a lot of sense to me. So why should you use Apple Search Ads? Obviously, it's the only paid way to get visibility in the App Store. Remember the 65% number. And I think it's an amazing opportunity to test things. Apple claims, and this was at the beginning of last year, so about a year ago, they claimed a 50% conversion from click to install. I couldn't find specific numbers if that's still the case, but looking through other reports, this is still a very high conversion, and it's much higher than all other networks. Obviously, the very important thing here is the ability to protect your brand, showing ads and making sure that that spot is not taken by someone else, and that you appear when someone is looking for your brand directly, that you appear in both paid and organic searches in the App Store. And the other really interesting thing is the Apple search ads can actually help organic Apple search optimization. So this comes in two ways. You can actually get volume estimates and search popularity, but you can actually use, you can test different variants, you can test different keywords, you can do competitor monitoring, and as someone said, in a tweet, basically, Apple gives you search popularity data now through search ads, so you can see how wrong some ASO's tools have guessed it. And so there was like a really interesting, you are now getting data directly from Apple versus from other tools. And I think an interesting, I use an interesting comparison would be, I use SEMrush to do a lot of analysis on the web. And it's kind of like really awesome, and I get really interesting data. But when I compare the data that they give on Branch, or where our traffic is coming from and where most of our traffic is coming, is actually very different than what I see in Google Analytics. So while I use something like SEMrush a lot, I also learned to not trust the data completely. So now using this can actually give you the exact data. So it's a really good complement to the ASO tools that you might be using already. So some tips for Apple search ads. And I thought that these were really interesting. So one of the really interesting things, and I think this is something that you have to decide for yourself, but basically making sure that you check the position of every keyword that you're going after, and potentially turning ads off when you reach the top organic result. So when you are basically in some way, if you're already the top organic result, you are getting much lower click-through rates on your ads. People will probably go and click on the organic. So you're in a way cannibalizing your own ads. The one reason to actually keep the ads would be to not allow your competition to actually have an ad and take away from your traffic. So, depending on your budget, this is something you might, and depending on your risk, you might want to test having those ads on and off and see if it's actually worth keeping them on to keep your competition away. It's kind of the same way you would do in AdWords. Sometimes run ads against your own keywords, and sometimes you might think that you have a good enough brand recognition that you don't need to do that, and competitors can run ads against you, but that's okay. The other thing that is interesting is when you look at your traffic, even in the US store, those people are not all necessarily in the US. So some people might be accessing the US store from other countries. And one way to limit that traffic and get a lot more traffic from the country specifically you're in is actually to turn ads off at night. So only have ads on during like the day and the evening in that particular country. The other really interesting thing that I think you should keep in mind is that when you run ads, what Apple only gives you is the number of installs that you're getting from a particular ad. And while that's very, very interesting, it's not the whole story. So I remember when we were running, when we were doing ads for Kindred, we were doing ads on Facebook, and we certain campaigns were much better buying installs, but those were like the teenagers, the campaigns aimed at teenagers. And teenagers never bought. So it was much cheaper to buy an install, and I was getting tons of installs from those ads. They weren't buying. Versus the ads towards moms had a much lower click-through rate, and they were a lot more expensive. But when I look beyond the install to the actual purchase rate, they were buying 10 times as much of the teenagers. So it actually, when I looked at cost per paying customer, it was a lot cheaper to run ads to mom than it was to run ads towards teenagers. So when you think about your audiences and when you think about how to measure your Apple search ads, it's important to use an attribution platform like Branch to actually do in-app events and measure those by campaign and by source, and make sure that you are putting money in the campaign that's actually giving you user activations or users actually buying. And then the last one, which again makes a lot of sense, just make sure to do it, is to use negative keywords as much as possible. At Branch, I got burned. We were using an Airbnb case study, and it was like really awesome. And it wasn't obviously in Apple; it was on the web. But we used it, and it ended up being on a site that wasn't the best site. And Airbnb saw it and felt that it was against their brand, so they stopped allowing us to use their case study in paid ads. And that's because we weren't careful enough about the negative keywords. So similarly, I think making sure that your app doesn't appear in a search that's completely irrelevant or even hurtful for your brand, I think is very important. So setting those negative keywords up is something that I highly recommend for any mobile marketer. Okay, so the last part of the presentation, I'll talk a little bit about Apple Search Attribution and about how kind of the new solution that we built at Branch can help you look beyond distribution of the app itself. So one of the biggest problems that I see, so I went before this and I actually looked at what other people presented about Apple Search Ads, and they always said that when it comes to attribution, you should assume 25% to 40% mismatch. And I think I went in the wrong direction. So in this growing multi-diverse world, it's now very important to move on from just cookie-based tracking methods to something that actually looks at the user journey holistically. So when you use an attribution platform, it's important that you look at and try to understand not just the last click and how that person got to you, whether it was from a search ad or from a different place, but how does that fit with all the other different properties and all the other different campaigns that you might be running yourself. So think about an example. Someone clicking on a web ad and then viewing your brand, perhaps on a website. Maybe it's your website, maybe it's even the App Store. And then they drop off. And then 5 days pass. And then someone might be searching for the App Store and then goes to the App Store, searches there, and then clicks on an Apple search ad and then ends up purchasing. So attribution providers, you would see this as a direct install or an install that comes from the Apple search ad through Apple. But if you were using someone like Branch, we would actually attribute this person that and give you an understanding that this person might have actually also seen the web ad that was clicked 5 days ago. So I think the big advice that I have in this area is when you think about attributing ads, both Apple search ads, but actually all other ads, it's important that you try to understand not just the ad itself, but also every other touch point that the user has. So instead of just looking at paid, trying to understand if organic and something that you might be counting over organic actually came because of a paid campaign that you were running. So basically looking at people versus just clicks and versus just cookies, you can actually attribute 30% more events. And that's kind of how we look at attribution. We have like a persona database that helps you understand the user across the web and also across apps, and give you better attribution because we see all the different touch points. So instead of looking of just web to web or app to app, we actually try to tie web to app and build this persona that adds an IDFA and then adds all the different cookies on different browsers and give you a better, fuller understanding into a user and their journey. So this was kind of this was basically my brief introduction into Apple Search Ads, how people look at Apple Search Ads in comparison to all the other different marketing channels, both paid and organic, and how to do better attribution. So if you have any questions, you can email us at webinars@brand.io, and we're here to answer any questions about Apple Search Ads, attribution for Apple Search Ads, and different properties. So yeah, thank you so much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed the rest of the conference. Thank you.